In today's video, we are going to be talking about why everybody hates Russians. Anti-Russian sentiment around the world has only continued to grow in recent years, especially after what's going on between Ukraine and Russia, and because of this, number of people who have grown to hate Russia and overall Russians is increasing. Especially it concerns Western countries, and you know guys, Russia nowadays is kind of considered to be a threat to many nations in this world when it comes to their safety. And that's why most of the Russia's neighbors are beware of Russia. But in actuality, a resentment towards Russia has its pretty long history. So like today's topic is about why many nations do not really like Russians. Without further ado, let's get started the video. So like the first reason is pretty common for powerful countries. It's unleashing wars and interfering in the affairs of other countries. Starting with the emergence of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, which further became Russia, it begins to pursue an expansionist policy towards all its neighbors, which results in the seizure of the new lands and in constant war between different countries and people. Because of such policy, Russia soon becomes a major regional power and only increases the pressure on its neighbors and begins to compete with other countries for hegemony in Europe and Asia. Russia, in one way or another, fought with almost all countries of Europe and many countries of Asia. Russia waged 12 wars with Turkey, 10 wars with Poland, 10 wars with Sweden, and 2 wars with Germany, a number of skirmishes with Prussia, competed with the Britain for super influence, fought twice with Japan, and fought for influence in Asia, competed with the United States in Cold War, and participated in many hybrid wars. Throughout its history, Russia has fought with a considerable number of countries, which still reflects the attitude towards Russians in the international arena. Of course, the recent events of 20th century and 21st centuries have become the most important period. During the existence of the Union, the Soviet Union pursued a rather aggressive policy regarding the spread of its ideology, made attempts to arrange a revolution in many countries. After the establishment of Soviet power, the Bolsheviks proclaimed a course for a world revolution, which ultimately failed but left a negative imprint on the countries of Europe, which began to have a purely negative attitude towards the Soviet Union. After the end of World War II, Soviet influence expanded significantly in the world and spread far beyond the Soviet Union, both to Eastern Europe and Asia, and also moved to other continents. The Soviet Union actively interferes in the politics of other countries, arranges revolutions to their sponsors and participates in wars, supplies weapons to leftist rebels, and so on. During the Cold War, directly or indirectly involved in dozens of military conflicts, civil wars, and revolutions. In general, by any means, it was trying to undermine the existing capitalistic regimes without regard to the local people. That is why in many countries, hatred have been developing for the Soviet Union, and with it for the Russians, as a people forming a state. The anti-Soviet propaganda of Western countries at that time also made itself felt, and because of this, many people, even without the intervention of the Soviet Union in their affairs, began to treat him negatively. Even in seemingly friendly socialist countries, the Soviet Union pursues a rather tough policy and suppresses any popular discontent. So, for example, by the forces of Soviet army, the uprising in Hungary and the Prague Spring in Czechoslovakia were suppressed. The Soviet regime showed that with the help of tanks, it was ready to hold loyal regimes, which affected the modern dislike for Russia. Many communist movements in Europe also turned away from the Soviet Union. At the same time, the Sino-Soviet split occurred, which made China and the Soviet Union almost the main enemies. In the 21st century, Russia also continues to pursue an expansionist policy, trying its best to maintain its former influence in the world. Today's Russia is trying to maintain power, at least within the post-Soviet countries, by actively influencing their politics. Any encroachments of these countries towards the West causes a response in the form of a political confrontation, or it develops into military clashes or into a hybrid war, as happened with Ukraine and Georgia, for example. Such a policy causes weariness among neighboring countries, which is why most of the countries of Eastern Europe are extremely negative about Russia, because they are afraid of its military power. Thus, Russia continues to interfere in the affairs of other countries, which poses a threat to Europe, and this is where the picture of Russian militarism and the Russian threat emerges. The second reason reason is inherent in dictatorship and authoritarianism in Russian politics. For many centuries, Russia has traditionally been an authoritarian country to varying degrees. In the days of Russian Empire, everything was ruled by an absolute monarch, whose decisions were undeniable and indisputable. If this was typical for Europe in the 17th and early 19th centuries, then the second half of the 19th century resulted in mass revolutions throughout Europe and led to a softening of the regime in many European countries. In some countries, a republican system is established. In others, while maintaining the monarchy, parliaments are created, which are now able to seriously influence the country's politics. In Russia, the same processes do not occur, but only begin at the beginning of the 20th century, despite the creation of the State Duma in the 1905. It was partly nominal, because absolutism in Russian Empire practically remained until its last day. With the coming to power of the Bolsheviks, the democratization course was initially proclaimed. However, Russia again returned to its authoritarian roots, and Stalin established a one-man dictatorship. Despite the softening of the regime after the death of Stalin, authoritarianism remained the basis of government until the day of its existence of the Union. As for modern Russia, the situation in the wane has not improved. Yeltsin became the first president also with authoritarian manners, and since 2000s, the government has been headed by Putin. For most European countries, the authoritarian regime is perceived as a hostile or dark past. It is also worth talking separately not only about the hostility of Russians outside of Russia, but also about the dislike for Russians on the territory of modern Russia. The main reason why a number of peoples of Russia do not like the Russians too much is the conquest by the Russians of the indigenous lands of small peoples. As already mentioned, for many centuries, Russia has been actively expanding from a small Moscow Principality. Several centuries later, it turned into a Russian Empire, spread over half of Eurasia. So such a policy led not only to the fight against major powers, but also to the enslavement of dozens of small people and the inclusion of their lands in the Russian Empire. And as you understand, this often happened with the help of violence. Thus, the indigenous people of Russia, or the people who were ever part of Russia, have memories that the Russians essentially conquered them, and their people were forced into a new order. Many people were also forcibly assimilated, both during the Empire and during the Soviet Union. In many regions, active Russification was carried out, indigenous languages was forced out, and culture was suppressed. National life was destroyed. In Soviet times, writing was replaced, and a number of people were expelled from their own indigenous lands. All this has led to the fact that some people living in Russia, or who were in the Russian Empire or in the Soviet Union, treat Russians with negativity because of their former repressive policies. The Balts recalled the annexation of their lands by the Union, the Ukrainians the prohibition of their language by imperial decrees, the Chechens the expulsion of their people to Central Asia and the recent war, the Poles the liquidation of their country. All this is reflected in the perception of Russia today. Therefore, even now, the above-mentioned people have claims against the Russians and their politics. Summing up, it's worth saying that dislike for Russians is due to a long historical process, the formation of the Russian state through wars, the enslavement of peoples, and the expansion of beyond influence. Many nations are still afraid of Russian expansion. So if you liked this video, don't forget to smash the like button, write down the comment, and subscribe to my channel, and see you in the next video. Peace.